Should you type the words microdose into a social media video platform or any search engine, you will not be able to count how many talks, discussions, insights, shared experiences there are on this subject of small doses of psychedelics or other objects, things. Because the topic of utilizing alternative treatments for mood enhancement, self-improvement, for the sake of the experiences themselves, or to move forward the human wave in the human waltz that we all are, to better corporately understand where we're going, individually, subjectively, objectively, and globally. And the subject of psychedelics and their practical application is alive again, thankfully. I can offer nothing else, and perhaps little that is insightful towards that movement. But here there is, in this small corner, an attempt to articulate, probably overcomplicate, one's own experiences of the use of psychedelics, macrodosing, and the benefits and the limits of that. Makes me laugh even thinking about it. And experiences of microdosing. Mostly for me, these would be around LSD and mushrooms, psilocybins. Though I have had an experience, limited thereof, but at least an experience of dimethyltryptamine or DMT that I can perhaps refer to. Who knows if that'll even come back. As is all of these talks, this is organic, spontaneous, verbal expression. The hope is, as always, to get out of the way so that the narrative that is given is given. Yet there is a mind that would seek to express whatever's expressed in a particular way that it can then claim is due to its own input thereafter. And doesn't the mind seem to do that? So I think I know I first took LSD on the suggestion of a friend in 1987. It is a long time ago now, it's an ever-lengthening time ago now. I was at the festival in the UK, Glastonbury. I actually bought my first falafel there with hummus. Amazing experience. Really don't need any psychedelics after the first experience of falafel with hummus and pita bread with onions and salad and dressing. Yeah, it was a time of new experiences. So I bought my first 16th of an ounce of hashish, little sticky black lump, this big, and I bought my first blotter of acid, tiny little square. Let's see if I can emulate the size, about that big, which I was assured for the price of £3 as it was then. It probably still is. Drugs don't go up much except for cocaine. But there was LSD on it. So I consumed this, and then I watched a band from Birmingham in England out of the Rock Against Racism movement called Misty and Roots with my friend Chris, as we stood there and began to have a psychedelic experience watching reggae music, which is a beautiful accompaniment to such an experience. Yet, was I convinced by the end of their 10 songs that they played one song 10 times, and that as we cheered for more, because that was what you did. They came back on and they repeated that song for the 11th time. At no point did I not enjoy that one song that I thought they were doing, and clearly they weren't just playing one song. But I do remember there was a visual distortion, which is what psychedelics do. They do not create the appearance of things that aren't there, but they distort what is there, sensory distortion. They heighten hearing, they elevate the visual field. Sense of smell is increased, taste, although this was after the falafel. Everything is heightened, and one is drawn outwardly into the realm of the senses, poured into experience. So there's a staring out into colour. There is a listening at a greater level to sound of all types. There's a sensitivity to and a subtlety that is enhanced in that sensitivity. Sensitivity times subtlety is embellished in the experiential field, and sensorially we are pulled out into experience. And the fundamental change that occurs is the absence of the dominating function of the mind. So we are literally in the realm of the senses. We are pulled out of the usual thought narrative and into what spiritually we might call the tantric, which is the world of forms, or the apparent world of forms, although in tantric there is no form, there is just oneness in all its sensory beguilement, experiential awesomeness. And then the mind appears to then articulate or attempt to articulate that to the shared family, the person we're with, or to oneself, back to oneself. The mind necessarily activates in an effort to understand the experience that's going on. Understanding appears at the end of the thoughts about it when we say, aha, I get it, or I understand. We acknowledge understanding by saying, I understand, I now understand. Before taking a substance, I had an opinion about it. I had certain beliefs that were given to me or that I developed out of given beliefs. So opinion, belief. But then finally I had direct experience, participation in the event that was in using psychedelics as a sacrament or as an object to bring about a different state, perhaps a purer or more natural state, or a pointer at least to the stateless state of one's own being. And precipitating movement that brought that about was to come out of the mind, to be put into the body, to not know what to say, to find in fact quite soon the experience of the substances in the body, and it's a very sensate experience, psychedelics, whether micro or macro, of being bodily aware, being body conscious over mind with a small m. Big mind is ever present, of course. Beingness itself is the dominating experience of the human being, whether on psychedelics or not. Psychedelics point very well to that. But here I am in my early 20s, experiencing psychedelics for the first time and really enjoying it and taking to it. I spent the next decade re-experiencing that same experience until there was a movement through other forms of substance use that have other narratives and other stories attached to them. But there was a decade long at least, perhaps slightly more than a decade long at least, of using psilocybins, LSD, MDMA, variants on that, MDA, 2CB, had an encounter with 2CB a few times, and various self-made concoctions of that in order to get high. These weren't These were activities of seeking, of course, and finding a state, a temporary state that was alluring and wonderful and electric and alive and guiding and helpful and supportive and safe at the time. But there would be a returning to, a withdrawal from those states into the usual state, which was, for this mental narrative, at least for this person at the time, personality, self-concept at the time, that I found it was difficult or was confusing, and certainly at the end of the day wasn't as fluid as I was used to knowing in these altered states. And then there was of course, years away from the psychedelic experience, of course, and then moving into the microdosing experience, that is using the same psychedelics in a way that was useful, that brought about the same bodily experience, brought about the sensate experience, took me once more into the realm of the senses and a looking out into the world of forms and an enjoyment of that, the prosaic flower. I mean, flower really isn't prosaic, ordinary, is wonderful, of course, but to have that door of perception in the micro level once more open, there was still a sensation in the body to microdosing, unless I was getting it woefully wrong, but I followed the inscription on the label and followed the prescription as it was prescribed by the teacher that passed these on to me, and by the gamut of information we can find if we want to do the research out into the internet, onto the internet. But there was still a pulling out into experience. There was still an awesomeness to the expression of life, to the expression of music, to the expression of art and nature. And that is the gift of the psychedelic experience, whether macro or micro, is that it shows us, again, that the door of our usual way of perceiving things isn't the only perception to those things. The door is opened, we uncover, we discover, we recognize we're on the inside of an experience. We don't really have the psychedelic experience and say to ourselves, wow, yeah, this is new. We already know the experience. We are as if saying, yes, I know this to be true. That's not to say that usual functioning is navigatable in a psychedelic or a macro state. Certainly there are ways in which we can function in the micro-dosed state and we can go about our business, but there is an alteration there. Set and setting is everything, of course. Doing them in the right space or around the right people, or therapeutically, do much more research, and certainly listening to this small talk prior to that experience, though hopefully this is some kind of a pointer to asking other people in a more direct way. You can always email me and ask me. My email's my account. A pointer to that moving of the perception that we have about people, places and things, our story, our narrative, or the narrative that we have around specific events, experiences that we've been through. So the application of these in the right set and setting with clinical guides, with what are shamans, really, to use that word loosely and certainly not in a kind of new agey way, but to have a teacher there or someone who's, most important of all, travelled the path before that we are now newly travelling, that has done the work, is always important, whatever methodology we're using to bring about a new experience of our life and a new experience of our way of being, or a new way of being itself, that we can go out into the world and feel transformed. To be transformed is to be radically put back together, so repaired or re-established in a way of being that is brought about sometimes radically and sometimes by a process of knowing, capital K, in the body, knowing in the body that we're moving towards the experience of a knowingness and a way of being that we can move out into the world and not feel as if the events of the past have us, but that finally we have them. This is the ultimate transformative experience, I feel, is that, that we are not owned by our past. We are not our story, but we have the story and we see its movement across our days, but we are not taken by it. Sometimes we are taken by it, but we know that we've been taken. This is the difference. And this new wave, this new generation of the use of micro-dosing and the use of psychedelic experiences in a therapeutic and clinical setting, unfortunately at vast cost, or with the right guys, or usually at vast cost it seems, if one would search out on the internet. And perhaps rightly so. Who am I to say? My experiences have been the experiences that I've described. I've had the macro experience and the micro experience, and I've had no experience. In fact, the outcome of the microdosing experience for me, as I currently understand it at least, is that, yeah, psychedelics still do what they do, but their gift, the gift that they gave me all those years ago, standing in a field in Somerset, listening to Misty and Roots play the same song 11 times with Chris, is that, and this is the way in which the door of perception is altered, is that there is not just one way. It moves us from an either-or mindset, an either-or view of things, into a both-and experience. An experience is saying, well, I only know some truth. Or, again, of the Quaker aphorism, always consider the idea that you might be wrong. It's worth consideration, investment in that narrative. To say so to finally see and to look and see whether there might be an alternative way of looking at things. We can get this through being in community as well, where we see other people have completely disparate or opposite views to our own. But to not be frightened by that, perhaps the embodiment of all that I've said here and how that manifests for me now is this idea that rather than being frightened by otherness and difference, or triggered by otherness and difference, on a good day at least, I'm excited by the idea that I've never heard this view before, and that even though it's bringing stuff up in me that I would rather not be experiencing, I am, so there's an acceptance of that, but also to be slightly, perhaps, somewhat titillated or interested in what that might mean and what that might teach me about myself, to reflect. Is to see psychedelics then, and all experience thereafter, as a mirror. What is this experience teaching me about me? And what a gift that is.